The morning Bella Adams turned 31, nobody said a word about it. Not her father, not her younger sister, not a single soul in the town of Redvale, Texas. She woke before sunrise the way she always did, pulled on her worn work dress, and went out to feed the chickens. And if she paused for just a moment at the fence post, staring out at the empty road that stretched beyond the hills, well, nobody saw that either. Nobody ever really looked at Bella Adams anymore. That was something she had quietly accepted. What she had not accepted, what she refused to let go of even now, was the feeling that somewhere beyond that empty road, something was still waiting for her. She just didn't know that something had a name, and that name was Thomas. Bella was the oldest daughter of Harlan Adams, a man who had built the largest cattle ranch in Redvale through equal parts stubbornness and silence. He was not a cruel man, but he was the kind of man who measured a person's worth by what they produced. And Bella, in his quiet estimation, had produced very little of lasting value. She had not married. She had not given him a son-in-law to help with the land. She had not done the one thing that frontier society expected of a woman by her age. What she had done was run the household, keep the books, nurse her mother through 3 winters of bad health, and hold the family together with both hands while her father looked the other way. But none of that was spoken of. None of that counted in Redvale. Her younger sister Darlene had married at 19, a merchant's son from a neighboring county. People had smiled and nodded and said, "That's how it should be." When Darlene visited now, she brought her 2 small children and a kind of careful pity in her eyes that she tried to disguise as sisterly warmth. Bella noticed. Bella always noticed things people thought she didn't. What no one in Redvale knew, what Bella herself had almost forgotten, was that 11 years ago, a young man had told her he would come back for her. He had said it quietly, standing at this very fence, with dust on his boots and nothing but a bedroll and an old horse to his name. She had laughed, not unkindly, and told him not to make promises the wind would just carry away. He hadn't argued. He'd only looked at her in that steady, unhurried way of his and said, "I'll come back when I have something worth offering." She had not heard from Thomas since. Redvale was the kind of town that remembered everything and forgave very little. It had a church, a general store, a saloon that decent women walked past without looking, and a population of just under 300 people who knew each other's business better than their own. Bella had grown up under the weight of that familiarity. As a girl, it had felt like belonging. As a woman past 30, it felt more like a verdict. The talk had started gently enough, years ago. "Bella Adams is particular, that's all." Then it shifted. Bella Adams scared off the Mercer boy, you know. And now, in its final settled form, it went simply, "Poor Bella." 2 words, said with a slow nod and a look that lasted just a half-second too long. She had stopped going to the church socials 2 years back, not out of bitterness, she told herself, but because she was busy. The ranch kept her busy. Her father's health was beginning to slip, and somebody had to watch the ledgers, oversee the ranch hands, negotiate with the feed supplier who came through every 3rd month. That somebody was always Bella. But there were evenings, long, quiet evenings after supper, when the house went still, where she sat by the window with a cup of cooling coffee and let herself wonder. Not about marriage exactly. She had made a kind of peace with that uncertainty. She wondered about the other shape her life might have taken, the roads she hadn't walked down, the words she hadn't said. She never let herself wonder too long about Thomas. He came back on a Thursday. Bella was in the yard when she heard the sound of a horse on the road, slow and deliberate, the way a man rides when he's not in a hurry because he already knows where he's going. She didn't look up immediately. Riders passed through Redvale often enough. She was tallying feed sacks, and she had 17 more to count, but something made her stop at 14. She looked up. The man on the horse was broad-shouldered and trail-worn, with a jaw darkened by several days of growth, and a hat pulled low against the afternoon sun. He was leading a second horse behind him, a fine-looking roan with good strong legs. He slowed at the gate. He looked at her the same way he always had, like she was the only fixed point in a turning world. "Bella," he said, "just that." Like no time had passed. like 11 years was nothing more than a long afternoon. Her hand tightened on the clipboard she was holding. She was aware, suddenly, of the worn state of her dress, of the way her hair had come loose from its pins, of the fact that she was 31 years old and standing in a yard full of feed sacks while this man looked at her like she was worth crossing half the country for. "Thomas," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. He dismounted without being invited, tied his horse to the post, and walked toward her with the calm of a man who had rehearsed nothing and regretted nothing. He stopped a few feet away and took off his hat. He looked older. Of course he did. But there was something else in his face now, a weight, a settledness, like a man who had been through enough to know what actually mattered. Whatever he had been when he left, he was something different now. She just didn't know yet what that something was. "I said I'd come back," he told her. "You did," she agreed carefully. "You also took 11 years to do it." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. "I wanted to come back right." She studied him for a long moment. Behind her, she heard the front door of the house open, and she knew without turning that her father had come out onto the porch. She knew the exact quality of the silence that followed. Harlan Adams was a man who could communicate disapproval through stillness alone, and the stillness coming from that porch right now was very loud indeed. Thomas looked past her, toward the porch. Whatever he saw there didn't seem to alarm him. He put his hat back on. "I'd like to speak with your father," he said. Bella's chest tightened. "Thomas." "I know what I'm doing," he said quietly. That was the thing about Thomas that she had never been able to forget. Even when she'd tried, he always said exactly as much as was needed and nothing more. He never scrambled for words. He never filled silence with noise the way most people did. He just stood in it, steady as a fence post, and let things be what they were. She turned slowly toward the house. Her father stood on the top porch step, arms folded, face unreadable in the shadow of the overhang. He was looking at Thomas the way a man looks at a storm on the horizon. Not panicked, but not welcoming either. "Daddy," Bella said, "this is Thomas." Her father said nothing for a long moment. Then, "I know who he is." Something in the way he said it stopped Bella cold. Because there was no surprise in her father's voice. There was recognition, and beneath the recognition, buried so deep a person could almost miss it, there was something that looked, just faintly, like unease. Bella looked from her father to Thomas. Thomas was watching Harlan Adams with that same steady expression, but his jaw had tightened almost imperceptibly. These two men knew each other, and neither of them had ever told her. Harlan Adams did not invite Thomas inside that evening. He simply looked at him for a long moment, nodded once, like a man acknowledging a debt he hadn't expected to be called on, and went back through the front door without a word. The screen door closed behind him with a quiet final sound. Bella stood in the yard feeling like she had missed the first page of a story everyone else had already read. Thomas didn't seem rattled. He asked quietly if there was a place he could bed down for the night. And Bella, still trying to find her footing, told him the barn had an empty stall with clean hay. She watched him lead his horses around the side of the house with the unhurried ease of a man who had slept in far worse places and expected nothing more than what he was given. She went inside and found her father in his chair by the fireplace, staring at the cold hearth. "You know him," she said. It wasn't a question. Harlan was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "I knew his father, and—" He looked up at her then, and what she saw in his face was not anger. It was something older and harder to name. "Go to bed, Bella." She went, but she didn't sleep. It was past midnight when she lit the small lamp in her father's study and stood at his desk. She told herself she was looking for the feed supplier's contract she needed to review in the morning. She almost believed it. The drawer stuck a little, the way it always did in damp weather. Inside were the usual things: letters, receipts, a folded survey map of the ranch property. And beneath all of that, an envelope she had never seen before, plain and yellowed at the edges, sealed with old wax long since cracked. Her name was not on it. Thomas's name was not on it. It was addressed to her father in a handwriting she didn't recognize, and the postmark was from 11 years ago, almost to the month. Her hands went still. She did not open it. Not that night. She pressed it flat, memorized its position in the drawer, and placed everything back exactly as it had been. Then she carried her lamp back to her room and sat on the edge of her bed in the dark. 11 years ago, someone had written to her father. Around the same time, Thomas had stood at her fence and told her he would come back. The same time, Thomas had disappeared without another word. It was possible it meant nothing. She was almost certain it meant everything. Thomas was up before dawn. Bella found him at the water trough, washing his face, when she came out to start the morning feeding. She handed him a cup of coffee without a word, and he took it the same way. They stood together in the early quiet, the sky still pale and undecided above the hills. "Why did you really leave?" she asked. He wrapped both hands around the cup. "I was asked to." The words landed softly, but they landed hard. Bella kept her eyes on the horizon. "By who?" Thomas looked at her steadily. "You already know the answer to that." She did. She had known it since midnight, but hearing it spoken was different from suspecting it. Her father had sent Thomas away. 11 years ago, when Thomas had nothing but a bedroll and good intentions, Harlan Adams had decided he was not enough, and had made sure of it quietly, in the way that powerful men in small towns knew how to do. "He wrote to you," she said. "He paid me," Thomas said, simply, without bitterness. That surprised her. She looked at him. "I was 22 and had nothing," he said. "He offered me enough money to get started somewhere else. He told me you deserved better than a drifter with empty pockets." He paused. "I took the money, Bella. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But you came back. But you came back." "I came back," he agreed. "I built something. Paid every cent of that money into land and cattle up in New Mexico. Sold at the right time. Came back when I said I would. Just took longer than either of us expected." She searched his face for something to be angry about, and found something more complicated instead. A man who had been bought, but had refused to stay bought. "My father won't accept this easily," she said. Thomas nodded slowly. "I know. That's why I'm not asking him first this time." He reached into his shirt pocket and held out something small. A ring. Plain silver, modest and honest, worn smooth at the edges like he'd been carrying it a long time. "I'm asking you," he said. Bella looked at that ring for a long time before she touched it. It wasn't the grandest thing she had ever seen. It didn't try to be. It was a simple band of silver with a small inlaid turquoise stone, the kind of ring a man buys when he finally has enough to buy something real, but hasn't forgotten where he came from. She thought it was the most honest thing anyone had ever offered her. She took it from his palm, but she didn't put it on. "Give me until Sunday," she said. Thomas nodded. He didn't push. That steadiness of his, the quality she had never been able to forget, it held even now. The conversation with her father happened Saturday evening. Bella chose the timing deliberately. After supper, when the house was still and Harlan Adams had nowhere to retreat to without making it obvious, she placed the old envelope on the table between them. Her father looked at it. The silence stretched long and thin. "You had no right," she said quietly. She didn't raise her voice. She had made a decision not to. Anger would let him retreat into stubbornness. Steadiness was harder for him to deflect. Harlan Adams was quiet for a moment. Then, in a voice rougher than usual, he said, "I was protecting you." "From what?" "From a man who had nothing." "He has something now," she said. "He built it himself with the very money you used to push him away." Her father's jaw tightened. She could see the conflict moving through him, the pride, the regret, the particular stubbornness of a man who had made a decision decades ago and built his understanding of himself around it. "Bella," his voice came out quieter, "you were everything to me after your mother got sick. I didn't want you following some drifter into hardship." "I know," she said. And she meant it. She understood it. She just refused to let understanding become acceptance of something wrong. "But it wasn't your choice to make, Daddy." He looked at his hands for a long moment. Old hands, tired hands. "No," he said finally. "I suppose it wasn't." It wasn't an apology exactly. With Harlan Adams, it never would be. But it was as close as he had ever come, and Bella recognized it for what it was. She reached across the table and put her hand over his briefly. Then she stood, picked up the envelope, and walked to her room. She married Thomas on a clear April morning, 6 weeks later. The ceremony was small. The church, the reverend, a handful of neighbors who came more out of curiosity than warmth, and left with something softer in their expressions than they'd arrived with. Darlene came with her children and cried in the way younger sisters cry at older sisters' weddings, with a complicated mixture of joy and relief and a little guilt they can't quite name. Harlan Adams walked Bella down the aisle. He didn't smile exactly, but he held her arm with a firmness that said everything he couldn't. Thomas stood at the front of that small church in a clean, dark jacket and boots, polished to a shine, and when Bella came through the door, he looked at her the way he always had, like she was the only fixed point in a turning world. She put the ring on properly that morning. They settled on Thomas's land in New Mexico the following year. He had built a solid house on good ground, modest but well-made, the kind of house that had room to grow into. Bella brought her mother's rocking chair and her father's old survey maps, because some things are worth carrying forward. Their first child, a boy, came 14 months after the wedding. They named him Harlan, because Bella believed in the grace of second chances. Her father, upon hearing the news, sat down heavily in his chair and didn't speak for a full minute. Then he asked when he could come visit. He came for 3 weeks that autumn and stayed for 2 months. Nobody mentioned the original plan. Their second child, a girl, came 2 years after that. They named her June because she was born in the warmth of early summer and because it was a name that felt like the beginning of something. Thomas ran his cattle with the same quiet steadiness with which he did everything. He was not a perfect man. He was impatient sometimes and slow to explain his thinking, and there were stretches of hard seasons where the worry wore on him visibly. But he came home every evening. He listened more than he talked, and he never once made Bella feel like a woman who had been chosen reluctantly or settled for out of convenience. She was 31 when he came back through that gate with dust on his boots and a ring he'd been carrying too long. She was 33 when she understood fully and without reservation that the waiting had not been wasted. Some things take the time they take. Some people find each other late not because they weren't meant to, but because they both needed to become the versions of themselves worthy of what they were walking toward. Bella Adams had believed, for a long time, that no one was coming. Thomas had spent 11 years making sure that when he came right. In the end, that made all the difference.